They traveled galaxies, defied death on screen, and made us believe in a better tomorrow. But their real-life endings were anything but sci-fi. Illness, addiction, loneliness, and you expected death. These are the haunting tales of the stars who left us far too soon. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Let's dive in. Leonard Nimoy as Spock. Leonard Nimoy was 35 when he stepped into the role of Mr. Spock in the original Star Trek series. Stoic, logical, otherworldly, Spock became a cultural phenomenon. But behind the mask of restraint, Leonard Nimoy was breaking. Born March 26, 1931 in Boston, Massachusetts, Nimoy had fought tooth and nail to rise out of poverty, working odd jobs while chasing small roles. But no role prepared him for the silent devastation that followed Spock's success. By the early 1970s, Nimoy was a prisoner of his own creation, trapped by fan expectations, mocked in casting rooms, and unable to find work outside the shadow of Vulcan ears. Following that matter, his marriage of over 30 years was crumbling. He was drinking heavily, quietly, then publicly, and his children watched their father spiral into someone unrecognizable. In 1987, during filming for Star Trek IV, Nimoy found himself alone in his trailer with a letter from his son, Adam, only 21 at the time. "I don't know who you are anymore." He didn't answer. Instead, he downed another vodka, numbing the ache, and returned to set as if nothing had happened. That night, he collapsed. No hospital, no questions, just a quiet, bitter recovery and a call time the next morning. He eventually quit drinking in the 1990s, but the damage was already done. His lungs were scarred, his family bonds shattered. He later admitted in interviews that he had no memory of the entire years of his children's lives. "I was there," he said, "but I wasn't with them." Leonard Nimoy died on February 27, 2015, at age 83 from end-stage COPD, a result of decades of chain smoking during the years he most wanted to forget. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $45 million. But all the money, all the fame, never gave him back the nights he missed, or the son he almost lost. DeForest Kelley as Dr. Leonard McCoy. DeForest Kelley was 46 when he stepped into the role of Dr. Leonard Bones McCoy on Star Trek, the ship's gruff yet deeply human chief medical officer. His dry wit and weary compassion became iconic, but the man behind the character carried wounds that never fully healed. Born January 20th, 1920 in Toccoa, Georgia, Kelley spent years stuck in B-movie purgatory, almost always cast as the villain. He watched himself die on screen dozens of times while barely scraping by in real life. Between roles, he worked odd jobs, swallowed pride, and waited for something bigger, something real. When Star Trek came, it was salvation, but also a trap. The fame that followed was narrow, confining. He became beloved, yes, but only as McCoy. The roles dried up. The scripts stopped coming. Hollywood had labeled him, and that label stuck for life. In his final years, Kelley faced an agonizing battle with stomach cancer. The pain was constant, the decline slow. He never complained publicly, but those near him said his body failed him far before his spirit ever did. He read old fan letters in the hospital, each one a reminder that while Hollywood boxed him in, audiences never stopped loving him. DeForest Kelley died on June 11, 1999, at age 79, from complications related to stomach cancer. He left behind a legacy and a net worth of $5 million, modest by industry standards, but the real wealth was in the hearts he touched. They called him Bones, but what lingered was the soul. James Duhan as Montgomery Scotty Scott. James Duhan was 46 when he became Montgomery Scotty Scott on Star Trek, the no-nonsense, miracle-working chief engineer who kept the Enterprise running with sheer grit and genius. His Scottish brogue, steady hands, and immortal line, "I'm giving her all she's got, Captain," made him beloved around the world. But those hands held a truth no fan ever saw. Born March 3, 1920 in Vancouver, Canada, Duhan's path to stardom was paved in war. On D-Day, he stormed Juno Beach under enemy fire, guiding his men through a minefield before being shot 6 times by friendly fire that night. One bullet shattered his right middle finger. From that day forward, every performance was an illusion. Camera angles, gloves, prosthetics, all designed to hide what war had taken. Most fans never noticed, but he noticed every single day. That physical wound was only the beginning. Behind his steady on-screen demeanor, Duhan wrestled with post-war nightmares that never fully faded. After Star Trek, typecasting kept him in a box he couldn't escape. 2 failed marriages drained his finances. Raising 7 children pushed him into endless conventions, fan events, and voice work, grateful for the love, but exhausted by the grind. In the end, it was Alzheimer's that took the most from him. Bit by bit, the engineer of the Enterprise forgot the ship, the show, the crew. There were quiet moments when he didn't recognize old friends, and painful ones when he didn't recognize himself. James Duhan died on July 20, 2005, at the age of 85, from complications of pneumonia and Alzheimer's. His ashes were partly launched into space in 2008, a final journey among the stars he once pretended to navigate. At the time of his death, his net worth stood at $7 million. But no figure could ever measure the courage he carried or the legacy he left behind. Nichols as Nota Uhura. Nichols was 34 when she became Lieutenant Nota Uhura on Star Trek, a calm, commanding voice at the helm of the Enterprise, and one of the first black women on American television shown as more than a servant. She stood for dignity, for progress, for possibility. But her real life was quietly unraveling behind that polished uniform. Born December 28, 1932, in Chicago, Illinois, Nichols entered Hollywood with fire and talent, only to find doors slammed in her face. While Uhura broke barriers, Nichols was still being offered roles as maids and background characters. After Star Trek, offers didn't pour in. She faced 2 failed marriages, persistent health issues, and an industry that praised her legacy but rarely gave her work. By the 2010s, Nichols' health had begun to deteriorate. A stroke in 2015 signaled the beginning of a long decline. Dementia set in, slowly stealing her memories, her voice, her independence. Then came the legal war, her son and former associates clashing over control of her estate. Accusations of elder abuse, financial manipulation, and isolation surfaced. Nichols, once a beacon of strength, found herself at the center of a nightmare she couldn't even name. Nichols died of heart failure on July 30, 2022, in Silver City, New Mexico, at age 89. Only a handful of trusted loved ones were present. Her net worth at the time was estimated at $8 million, earned not just through performance but through endurance. The woman who once spoke for the stars left behind a legacy touched by history, but shadowed by betrayal. Barrett as Christine Chapel and Computer Voice. Barrett was 34 when she joined Star Trek in 1966 as Nurse Christine Chapel. Fans knew her as the gentle nurse, but they heard her everywhere, as the omnipresent voice of the Enterprise computer. To millions, she was the voice of the future. Behind that voice, however, was a woman fighting to be seen on her own terms. Born February 23, 1932 in Cleveland, Ohio, Barrett had been more than just Gene Roddenberry's wife. She was his editor, his keeper, the final voice on his ideas when no one else would listen. But in the final years of his life, when Roddenberry's mind began to slip from the effects of a series of strokes and undiagnosed neurodegeneration, it was Mahel who held everything together, writing notes, retyping pages, shielding his confusion from producers. One day in 1990, during pre-production on a Star Trek project, she found him locked in a hotel bathroom, weeping, unable to recognize the script in his hands. He asked her who had written it. It was his own. She lied, said it was a new writer. He smiled and said, "Pretty good." From that moment, Barrett stopped being a wife and became a silent nurse, a secret caretaker. She canceled her own voice sessions to care for him, hid his condition from the studio, and pushed through exhaustion, knowing that if the truth got out, everything they'd built could unravel. Hollywood didn't want its visionaries dying. They wanted them brilliant. When he died in 1991, she didn't mourn publicly. She went straight back to work. But by then, her health was already in decline. Constant fatigue, brittle bones, later diagnosed as early symptoms of leukemia. She never spoke about the night she found Jean unresponsive in bed, or how she cleaned the blood off the pillow before calling 911. Those memories stayed with her, even when her body began to give up. Michelle Barrett died on December 18, 2008, at the age of 76, after a quiet battle with leukemia. Her ashes were launched into space beside Jean's, as she had promised him years earlier. At the time of her death, her net worth was estimated at $10 million. Built through decades of work, loyalty, and sacrifice few ever truly saw. Rene Oberja as Odo. Rene Oberja was 52 when he joined Star Trek. Deep Space Nine in 1993 as Odo, the shapeshifter who longed to understand humanity but never fully belonged. Under layers of latex and solitude, Rene poured decades of quiet pain into the role. Born June 1, 1940 in New York City, Rene spent a lifetime chasing meaning through art. He was disciplined, private, never one to dramatize. But for months, he'd ignored the signs, shortness of breath, wheezing he blamed on age. Then came that morning in the garden, where he reached for a trowel and instead dropped to his knees, vision tunneling, ribs aching. When he looked down, his hands were red. He tried to laugh, said aloud, "You're being dramatic." But he knew. A scan days later confirmed it. Terminal lung cancer. Inoperable. Rapid. Final. He told no one for weeks. Not even Judith. He rehearsed how he'd say it, but couldn't form the words. Instead, he kept acting, kept recording audiobooks, kept answering fan letters as if everything was fine. Until one night, while recording a voiceover at home, he fainted mid-line. Judith found him on the floor, his mic still live. That was when the silence broke. From that point on, everything became about time. He planned his death like a performance, music cues, photos selected, scripts annotated for donation. Friends were invited to say goodbye, but not told they were. He didn't want pity, just presence. The slideshow he made, the one set to Beatles songs, played in a loop on a dim projector as he slipped into sedation, lungs failing, breath by breath. Rene Oberja died on December 8, 2019, at age 79 from advanced lung cancer in his California home. His death was medically assisted under California law. His net worth at the time was estimated at $5 million, but nothing he owned ever meant more than the dignity he reclaimed in the one scene no one else could write for him. Aaron Eisenberg as Nog. Aaron Eisenberg was only 24 when he stepped into the prosthetics of Nog on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. A defiant, fast-talking Ferengi who would grow into one of the series' most heroic arcs. But the young actor behind the mask was already living on borrowed time, his heart and kidney quietly failing him. Born January 6, 1969 in Hollywood, California, Aaron came into the world with just one malformed kidney. His teenage years were spent not on red carpets, but in dialysis clinics and hospital beds. At 14, he underwent his first kidney transplant. By 2015, decades later, the organ was dying. He couldn't afford another. In desperation, he launched a GoFundMe. The man who once walked the halls of Starfleet now waited by the phone for donor calls that didn't come. hooked to machines, living hour by hour. One night, just months before the second transplant, he collapsed in his bathroom. Alone, barely breathing, he dragged himself to his phone and called his fiancée, whispering only, "I don't know if I'm going to make it." She arrived before the ambulance. That moment, bruised, gasping on the tile floor, was when Aaron realized his body was never going to forgive him for surviving this long. The transplant came, but it was too late to undo the years of damage. His heart, already strained, began to give out. Still, he showed up for podcasts, conventions, fan meetups, cracking jokes through pain. He never told most people how bad it had become. Aaron Eisenberg died on September 21, 2019, at age 50, from heart failure. His net worth was just $1 million, but his worth to the Star Trek community was beyond measure. To fans, he was more than Nog. He was proof that even the smallest figures on screen could carry the heaviest battles and still smile. Mark Leonard as Sarak. Mark Leonard was 42 when he first appeared as Sarak, the Vulcan ambassador and father of Spock, calm, composed, a pillar of logic in the chaos of the galaxy. But while Sarak stood tall among stars, the man behind the character once wept in silence backstage. Born October 15, 1924, Leonard built his career on quiet strength. He played Romulans, Klingons, and finally the role that would define him, Sarak. Yet even at the height of Star Trek's cultural boom, he was rarely recognized by name. He'd sit at conventions, sometimes passed over by fans seeking autographs from the more famous cast. Between appearances, he returned to guest spots and off-Broadway gigs, battling the bitter truth that Sarak's gravitas didn't translate into steady paychecks. The darkest moment came in the late 1980s, during a particularly aggressive downturn in his health. A suspected cancer diagnosis loomed, but Leonard, uninsured at the time, postponed treatment to avoid hospital bills. For months, he performed on stage through pain, even vomiting between acts in one grueling production of King Lear. He refused to stop, terrified that disappearing from work would mean vanishing entirely. As his illness progressed, he slowly withdrew from the public eye. The once familiar figure at sci-fi conventions became an absence, whispered about by devoted fans. By the early 90s, he stopped taking calls from former castmates. When he finally appeared one last time as Sarak in Star Trek The Next Generation, he was already dying, his eyes glassy, his voice weaker, his hands trembling just out of frame. Mark Leonard died on November 27, 1996, at age 72. His death came quietly, with little media fanfare. His net worth was estimated at $3 million, not reflective of the legacy he left behind. In the end, the man who gave the universe Sarak left with no spotlight, only silence, fitting perhaps for someone who made dignity his final performance. Ricardo Montalban, as Khan Noonien Singh. Ricardo Montalban was 46 when he first appeared as Khan Noonien Singh in Star Trek, the original series, a genetically enhanced superhuman with sculpted strength and commanding presence. But on set, after each fierce line delivery and every proud, upright stance, he would return to his trailer, collapse to the floor, and cry silently into a towel. Born November 25, 1920, in Mexico City, Montalban suffered a devastating horseback injury in the early 1950s during a film shoot. A fall crushed 2 vertebrae and left his lower spine permanently damaged. For decades, he hid the agony beneath posture and poise. When he returned as Khan in Star Trek II. The wrath of Khan at age 61, the pain had intensified. He refused to use a body double. He refused special support. His chest, real and rigid, became a visual legend, while just beneath, his vertebrae deteriorated inch by inch. On some filming days, he could barely walk. Crew members whispered when they found him curled on the floor between takes, gripping his sides, unable to breathe through the stabbing pain. He wore orthopedic braces hidden beneath his costume, and swallowed painkillers that barely dulled the ache. Yet every time the camera rolled, he stood straight, eyes burning, voice unwavering. Khan never faltered. In private, he once said the hardest part wasn't the pain, but knowing he had to endure it to keep working in an industry that had little space for men like him. As a Mexican actor in Hollywood, he had to fight twice as hard for half the roles. And fight he did for others, founding the Nosotros Foundation to break down the doors that had always been slammed in his face. By the late 1990s, he was confined to a wheelchair. His spine had fused in several places. Acting became rare, the pain constant, but still, he smiled at conventions. Still, he signed autographs. Still, he sat tall, because Khan had never bowed. Ricardo Montalban died on January 14, 2009, at age 88, from congestive heart failure. He passed away in his Los Angeles home. His net worth was estimated at $10 million, but no number could measure the cost of a life lived in pain, or the legacy of a man who bore it with such unshakable dignity. William Shatner, as Captain James T. Kirk. William Shatner was 35 when he became Captain James T. Kirk in Star Trek. Bold, unflinching, the face of a new frontier. But decades later, it wasn't the Enterprise that nearly broke him. It was the night he found his wife, Noreen Kidd, lifeless at the bottom of their pool, her body still warm, her wedding ring catching the porch light as if begging him to undo the moment. Born March 22, 1931 in Montreal, Canada, Shatner had climbed his way to stardom with grit, charm, and a relentless drive that devoured marriages, friendships, and silence. He married Noreen in 1997, despite friends warning him about her struggles with addiction. He loved her anyway, desperately, perhaps recklessly. But on that summer night in 1999, everything shattered. Returning home from a horse show, he called out her name, heard nothing, and walked to the backyard. She was floating face down in the pool. Paramedics arrived. The autopsy revealed alcohol and Valium. The tabloids blamed him. Anonymous letters poured in. Some said it was neglect. Others whispered darker things. Shatner spiraled. He locked himself in the house for days. He later admitted he nearly followed her, that he stood at the edge of the same pool more than once, staring into its stillness. He blamed himself, his absences, his fame, his inability to save her. Therapy came. Then writing. He published a memoir, not to clear his name, but to survive the noise. Even as fans cheered his next appearance, he carried her death like a secret weight beneath the uniform of Kirk. Now 94 in 2025, William Shatner remains a living monument. With an estimated net worth of $100 million, he still writes, speaks, and reminds fans not to fall for impersonators online. In 2021, he became the oldest person to reach space. A real voyage, but perhaps never quite far enough to escape what he saw that night, in the glow of the pool, when the legend stopped and the man was left behind. George Takei as Hikaru Sulu. George Takei was 45 when he returned as Hikaru Sulu in Star Trek II. The Wrath of Khan. Confident at the helm, unshaken in crisis. But long before he piloted a starship, he'd been locked behind barbed wire, staring out at freedom through the slats of a government-issued barrack window, wondering why America had turned its back on his family. Born April 20, 1937 in Los Angeles, Takei was just 5 when he and his relatives were forced into Roware internment camp during World War II. At night, he'd hear his mother cry quietly into her blanket while pretending to sleep. His father, once a proud businessman, now swept dust from the floors of a crude mess hall. The shame of it never left him. He rarely spoke of the camps publicly until much later in life. But one moment, never shared on camera, defined his silence. The day his younger brother asked, "Are we bad people, George?" And he couldn't answer. That unanswered question followed him to Hollywood, where casting directors offered roles as waiters, villains, or voiceless extras. He took them, because there was nothing else. When Star Trek came, it felt like a breakthrough. But even then, he knew Sulu had been designed without depth. He pushed for more, fought for scenes, and quietly clashed with William Shatner, who often commandeered the spotlight. Off-screen, he kept an even heavier secret. He was a gay man in an industry that equated queerness with career suicide. One studio executive once warned him, "If they find out, you're done." In the 2010s, whispers spread that Teay was undergoing secret cancer treatments, allegedly prostate-related, yet he never missed a panel or public appearance. He'd joke, pose, smile, but behind closed doors, those close to him say there were nights he couldn't walk without help. He refused to let illness silence him. Not after surviving internment, not after hiding for half his life. As of 2025, George Takei is 88 years old. His net worth is estimated at $14 million, but the real wealth is in his voice. Still loud, still clear. From protest marches to memoirs, from Broadway to Twitter, he remains unshaken. For a boy once locked in a desert camp, every word he speaks now carries the weight of all he wasn't allowed to say. Patrick Stewart as Captain Jeanluke Picard. Patrick Stewart was 47 when he first stepped onto the bridge of the USS Enterprise as Captain Jeanluke Picard, stoic, articulate, a symbol of reason in a universe of chaos. But years before he ever wore the Starfleet uniform, he had once hidden in a kitchen cupboard, a trembling boy listening to his father beat his mother just feet away, praying the door would muffle her screams. Born July 13, 1940, in Muirfield, Yorkshire, England, Stewart's childhood was a theater of survival. His father, a decorated WW2 veteran, returned from the war a broken man, volatile, alcoholic, and abusive. For years, Patrick said nothing. He smiled for school photos, read Shakespeare under the covers, and built an inner world where words could shield him from fists. But the trauma seeped in anyway, into his bones, his silence, his shame. When Star Trek: The Next Generation catapulted him to global fame, he was still healing. One night in the late 1990s, while performing King Lear in London, he collapsed in the dressing room after curtain call, his hands shaking uncontrollably. His assistant found him sitting on the floor, whispering lines not from the play, but from Star Trek, over and over. He later confessed to friends that performing Lear had stirred old wounds. Too much control, too much rage, too familiar. That same year, he quietly underwent treatment for early-stage prostate cancer while continuing to work, never telling the cast. Through 2 divorces and an internal battle with self-worth, he developed a private dependency on alcohol to calm the noise in his head. Friends say he once arrived drunk to a rehearsal, then wept for an hour, repeating, "I'm not the man they think I am." That breakdown led him to therapy, and later, to activism. His work for domestic violence survivors wasn't charity. It was penance, memory, and unfinished mourning. As of 2025, Patrick Stewart is 85 years old. Now retired, he lives in quiet reflection with his third wife, Sunny Ozell, in England. His estimated net worth is $25 million, much of which he's given away to mental health and veterans charities. Though millions saw him as the calm captain of the future, his true heroism was surviving the war zone of his childhood and never letting it define his final act. Their journeys through the stars may be over, but their legacies continue to shine. Which Star Trek actor left the deepest mark on your heart? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from the final frontier.